Hello and welcome to the Built in the Bronx podcast. I am your host, Maximilian Hill, and today we have a very special guest. Johnathan Smith is a native New Yorker. He's a tireless advocate for civil rights. He's a graduate of Harvard University, a graduate of the New York University School of Law. He served as the Deputy Assistant Attorney General at the Department of Justice in the Civil Rights Division under Attorney General Merrick Garland. These days, he's the Vice President and Legal Director at the MacArthur Justice Center in Washington, D.C. Johnathan, thank you for coming on the Built in the Bronx podcast. How are you today?
Good. How are you? It's great to be with you today. And you forgot to mention my biggest accomplishment is that we went to high school together in West Hempstead, New York, or Long Island, many, many years ago. So it's great to see you again and to be here with you today.
We did. Great to reconnect with you after all these years. We did go to West Hempstead High School. Go Rams. Always great to catch up with some old friends. So let's get right into it. I've followed your career on LinkedIn for several years now. I think we've been connected on LinkedIn for a while, and you've been doing wonderful things working at the Department of Justice. So for our audience, tell us a little bit about the Department of Justice and your work there.
Sure. So working at the Department of Justice has been, one of the greatest privileges and honors I've had in my lifetime. I actually have served two periods of time in the Department of Justice. I worked there from 2014 until 2017 during the last 2 or so years of the Obama administration. I came in as a political appointee, so most of the staff at the Department of Justice, like all federal agencies, are career employees who work there regardless of who's in the White House, but there's a small cohort of folks who are appointed by the president in power. And so I had the privilege of coming in during the Obama administration, working there for about 2.5 years. Then I had the privilege again of coming back near the beginning of the Biden administration, and I worked there for about 3 years, just leaving a few weeks ago. And just for context, the Civil Rights Division is a part of the broader U.S. Department of Justice. It was founded in 1957 for the purpose of ensuring the enforcement of federal civil rights laws across the country. And so the Civil Rights Division has about 700 or so people, mostly based in Washington, D.C., or this area, and they are divided into 11 different enforcement sections, really running the gamut of American life. So they have now a criminal section that prosecutes police officers or other government officials who abuse their power. They prosecuted the officers, Derek Chauvin and the other officers who killed George Floyd. They also prosecute hate crimes. They prosecute human traffickers. We have a voting rights section that works to ensure that voting rights are adhered to, that people are not discriminated against when they choose to vote, which is obviously the cornerstone of our democracy. An employment section, a housing section, a disability rights section, education section, really, the full gamut. And, for me, as I said before, it was just a true privilege to have, not just once, but twice the opportunity to work there. And, a lot of people, when they think about the Department of Justice, they think about the big cases, that are in the newspaper, like, Derek Chauvin, or, where they're prosecuting Breonna Taylor, or they open, these big investigations into police departments. And that work is incredibly important and essential, but the vast majority of the work that the lawyers and staff do at the department is, kind of individual cases of discrimination that just happen. Someone loses their job because of their disability. Someone is sexually harassed by their landlord. someone is, unable to apply for a job for an unfair or discriminatory reason. And that's the bread and butter of the work that the division does. And, that is work that doesn't maybe make the front page of the New York Times, but it is important, and it is critical to ensuring that our democracy isn't just, some ideas on paper or in the Constitution or, in statutes or laws, but that it's real for people. I think particularly in this time that we live in, where so many people feel under attack because of who they are, where they come from, who they love, what they look like. It is so what they believe. It's so incredibly important to have the men and women of the Justice Department standing up each and every day for them and their rights. And it was just a total honor to be able to play a small part in that work and to work with them in those efforts.
Yeah, I think you got to serve in the Department of Justice during one of the most tumultuous times. I think in recent memory, I know the temperature on some of these issues is very high and very polarized time. So follow-up question, do you have any stories about, I guess, how your work has impacted, specific American citizens?
So yeah, and if I could just step back for a minute to what you said about the polarized times, one of the things that Attorney General Merrick Garland likes to say whenever he's talking to the public about, or even to the staff of the Department of Justice, is to remind them that the Department of Justice was founded in 1870, right after the Civil War. And one of the primary reasons why the department was founded was because at that time, the Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacist organizations were terrorizing the recently freed Blacks, Americans, mostly in the South, but not exclusively, who were seeking to exert their right to vote and their right to participate in our democracy. And it's interesting and in some ways very depressing that we are now 154 years from 1870, and the reality remains that far too many people in this country remain victimized, brutalized, discriminated against because, like I said before, of what they look like, of where they come from, what they believe. And so it is, I think, really important to contextualize the work that the Justice Department does, but so many other groups and people do every day to fight against discrimination, as although this time does seem particularly hard and tragic in many ways, that this is actually not a new phenomenon in American history, that our country has long had to battle with discrimination, with hatred, with bigotry, and although that's depressing, I also personally take comfort in that because I think again when you look at the news, when you read the newspaper, when you just see what's happening, it can be depressing and it can be isolating. But knowing that people have been here before and they have found ways to overcome, to persevere, to advance, the moral arc of justice. I think that is incredibly important. In terms of stories, there's a lot. I started before I worked at the Justice Department. I spent a number of years as a lawyer at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, working in both New York and DC. And this is the organization that was founded by Thurgood Marshall, who obviously argued Brown versus Board of Education and a number of landmark civil rights cases before the Supreme Court. And one of the cases I had the privilege of working on at the Legal Defense Fund was our case against the NYPD or the New York City about stop and frisk. And we actually focused, there were a number of cases that were filed against the NYPD at that time. Our case that I worked on was focused on NYCHA, New York City Housing Authority properties, and the ways in which at the time, police officers would do what were called vertical sweeps, where they would go into the NYCHA high rises, they would go to the top floor and then they would go through the stairwells and just, kind of go down each level. And if they found someone like sitting or talking or hanging out, they would stop them. They would ask them questions. Maybe they would arrest them. And we challenged that policy as discriminatory, as violating the U.S. Constitution and other laws. And what really struck me, ultimately, the team prevailed in reaching a landmark settlement, with the NYPD, and in leading to really meaningful changes. It certainly is not perfect, but a lot better than it was kind of at the height of Stop and Frisk in the early 2000s. And I always think about that case. I don't think about the victory. I think about the times I spent in NYCHA buildings talking to residents and hearing directly from them about, many of them agreed that what the NYPD was doing was wrong, was discriminatory, it was harassing. It would be a lot of grandmothers who would say, they're harassing me or my grandkids, but what they also said was that, but to be clear, like, we don't want the NYPD to do this, but we also want our residents to be safe and secure. We want to be able to live our lives like all other people do, with dignity and respect. And I think it was really important for us as lawyers, or for me as a lawyer in this case, to hear that, right? Because I think oftentimes as lawyers, it's really tempting for us to say, if we sit in our offices and say, we have, figured out the legal case, we know the solution, we know how to solve the problem. And I think it's really important to make sure that we leave space and time for people, the clients that we represent, the communities that we purport to represent, for their voice to be heard in that process. And then the second quick story I'll tell, which is actually my favorite story of my entire legal career to date, is so maybe favorite's not the right word, but the one that sticks with me the most is, so as I mentioned, I worked in the Department of Justice during the Obama administration, and as your listeners may recall, in 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court decided a very big civil rights case, Obergefell versus Hodges, which is the case that legalized same-sex marriage in all across this country, and after that case was decided, we saw a really severe backlash across the country against LGBTQI plus communities. People refusing to give marriage licenses to gay couples. People discriminating against them. An uptick in hate violence towards those communities. But we also saw an attack against transgender communities as well. And although I think being transgender is although still very hard for many people, it's much more known about and discussed today than it was. This was about 10 years ago, and one of the laws that was passed at that time was a law in North Carolina that prevented people from going to restrooms consistent with their gender identities. You had to go to the restroom of your birth sex. And so that was a law that was clearly designed to target transgender individuals. And so we sued them. The Department of Justice sued them. And on the day that we announced our lawsuit, the Attorney General at the time was Loretta Lynch, who actually hails from Brooklyn, or at least worked as a lawyer in Brooklyn for many years. And she was also the first Black female Attorney General in the United States. And she held a press conference the day that we announced the lawsuit. And I had the privilege of being in the room when she held the press conference. And she got up on to the podium and she said, in part, she said, my father and grandfather grew up in North Carolina, the same place where this law was passed. And she's Black. Her grandfather and father were Black. They grew up under Jim Crow. So she says, she said, I know what it's like to have a sign over a bathroom that tells people to go to one bathroom or the other bathroom. Obviously, in the Jim Crow era, it was whites only versus Blacks. but the same concept of kind of policing the ability of people to go to the bathroom. And she said, I know the harm that causes to people. I know from my father and grandfather hearing like the real discrimination and offense that causes people. And she said, here we are all these years later, and we're again putting signs over bathrooms, this time for transgender people versus cisgender people. And, she made this connection between being a Black person growing up in Jim Crow South to a transgender person growing up, in 2015 North Carolina, and made the parallels of, although these populations may seem very different, the harms and the discrimination feels the same. And I think that sticks with me because it's important to remember at least when I do this work, that it doesn't matter who the community is that's being harmed, whether it's a Black community or a transgender community or a Jewish community or a Palestinian community or whatever it might be, that it is important to recognize discrimination wherever it occurs and however it occurs, and to fight back against it. And also to recognize that there are synergies and there are intersections in the harms we suffer. And although we may feel very different and very isolated, when you suffer discrimination, to know that there are other people who know and have experienced that same type of trauma, the same type of injury, but have found a way to persevere and overcome is, I think, a really important lesson to take as a civil rights advocate.
Yeah, no, I thank you for wonderful stories. You mentioned, the news headlines, and I feel like I've actually gone on a news diet over the past couple of years. I have found it has helped me immensely in my state of mind. I think there was a book by a guy named Matt Taibbi called Hate Inc. And he worked in the media machine in New York City. And he basically exposes all the ways that, private news organizations they're not trying to share the truth. They're just trying to, boost their views, their clicks, all of that. And it's coming at the expense of people's health. So definitely, I think these days you got to take a news diet. But yeah, wonderful stories. We're meeting during a very polarized time. Is it possible to unite this country? And if so, what is your vision for how that might happen?
So just to your first point about a news diet, when I worked at the Justice Department, I could not take a news diet because that would not be a
That's
good way to
true.
do the
That's
job.
true.
But now that I've left, I agree 100% with that. But to your question, as I mentioned, the Justice Department was founded in response to hate violence in this country, to white supremacist violence in this country, and a lot of my work at the Justice Department, actually both times I worked there, was focused on responding to hate crimes, to hate violence. I mean, I think obviously we've seen just to give context, every year the FBI releases statistics about hate crimes in the country. And these statistics are gathered from, there's about 18,000 law enforcement agencies, police departments, sheriff's offices, state police departments across the country. So all those agencies are supposed to collect hate crimes information, and they send it to the FBI, who then compiles it. And the FBI is part of the Justice Department. So each year we would release those statistics, or they would release those statistics. And, it would not surprise anyone to know that right now we have seen over the last several years an exponential increase in the amount of hate crimes that are being reported. And what's even more depressing is that even though we're at the highest levels that we've seen literally in decades, most hate crimes in this country are not reported, either because police don't log them properly, because victims don't trust the police and don't report them. And so even though we're at the highest reported level, we know the actual number of hate crimes and hate incidents is much, much higher. We saw a lot of hate crimes against Asian and AAPI communities during the COVID pandemic. We saw, because again, New York, the horrific killing of 10 people at a Tops supermarket in a Buffalo supermarket a few years ago. A few years before that, the killing of a number of people at a synagogue, the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, because they were Jewish. These are all cases too. I should note that the DOJ has prosecuted the people responsible. There was another case a few years before, the Tree of Life Synagogue, involving a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, where a number of Latino people or people that the government assumed or thought were Latino, were killed or injured because of that. So, we see all of that context, and that's even before you get to October 7th, and the ways in which we have seen Jewish, Muslim, Palestinian, Arab communities be attacked and victimized in the aftermath of that. And so it is a really depressing and challenging environment. At the Justice Department, in response to this kind of rising tide of hate, while I was there, we launched this program called United Against Hate, which is a program that brings together, that actually, as of today, or like before today, but right now, is in every state, in every region of the country, there's currently a United Against Hate program in effect. And what that does is it brings together law enforcement. So it brings together the Justice Department, it brings together the U.S. attorneys, who are the kind of Justice Department offices in communities. It brings together often like local and state police and prosecutors, but it also brings together communities. It brings together clergy, it brings together students, it brings together community leaders and just community members who say enough is enough. And part of what we would often talk about when we went and did these, and so the program does these programs, these seminars and events around the country, which are designed to help people identify hate when it's occurring, B, allow people to report when that's happening. As I said before, if you don't report to law enforcement or to others what happened, then no one knows what happened and there can't be accountability. But also it works to build bridges between communities and law enforcement, because we also know that for many communities, there's a lack of trust or a lack of engagement. And when you are a community suffering a hate crime and you don't trust the local police or the local prosecutor's office, you're not going to go there. You're not going to want to engage with them. And so how can we build those relationships to hopefully prevent hate crime, but when they do happen, to make sure that there is an appropriate response? And one of the things we would often say in these programs is that, the Justice Department, other prosecutors, the FBI, the police, like we can, it's our job to go after people when they commit these crimes, to hold them accountable. But the goal here is not just to do that, because if we are going after people, that means that a crime or a bad thing has occurred. And in some ways it's too late, right? Because someone has been injured, someone has lost their life, someone has had their dignity taken away from them. And so we want to make sure that we are getting on the front end of these issues and making sure that we are forming these relationships and these partnerships. And, I've had the, again, privilege of going to a number of these events all across the country, speaking with a whole host of communities. I've met with Jewish groups after October 7th. I met with Muslim and Palestinian groups after October 7th. And, two things really strike to me in those conversations. One, it's heartbreaking. It's like heartbreaking to hear the fear and the concern, to hear a parent talking about their concern when they send their kids to school. They don't know what's going to happen to them. They don't know if they might be bullied or worse. Those are things that stay with you. But the other thing that I take away from those events and meetings and conversations is that, although people often say when you talk to them who are being the victims or concerned to be the victim of hate, they often say we feel alone and we feel isolated and we feel like no one sees us or hears us and we're just left by ourselves to solve this problem. And what I once heard a person say in response to that, all of us, whether you're a lawyer, whether you work for the Department of Justice or you don't, whether you're an adult or a student or a child, like all of us have the ability to reach out to the people around us and to let them know that they're not alone, that they actually have allies, have support, have a friend and a partner. And I think that, that doesn't necessarily solve the hate crime, but I think it doesn't solve the problem. But I do think it's incredibly important to stand with people, to stand with communities, to let them know that they're not alone. Because I think, the thing about hate violence, hate crimes, is that they're message crimes. They're designed to send the message that you're not welcome. You don't belong here because of what you look like or where you come from. And I think when we stand aside people and with people and lift people, we send a different message that you are welcome here, that this is your home, that you do have space here. And I think that work is incredibly important and the way we're going to find ourselves out of this very, I think, unfortunate cycle that we're in at this moment.
Got it. It's graduation season. So this week, countless Lehmanites, which is the nickname we give our students at Lehman College, they'll be crossing the stage, receiving their diplomas. You've had a wonderful career. I'm privileged to be a friend and to know you. So I think I'd be interested in to see what kind of advice you would give any of our students at Lehman College who were, they just passed through the gauntlet of college for 4 years and now they're trying to make their way in, an uncertain and changing world. So what advice would you give them?
Well, first, congratulations to all the Lehmanites. That's incredibly exciting. It also makes me feel a little bit old every time this part of the year comes up. I think about how long it was since I graduated from college. But yeah, no, I think it's exciting, and I think it's a few things. I mean, and none of this is going to be, I think, groundbreaking, but still probably true is to make sure that you are being true to yourself in the work that you want to do. Like the thing that wakes me up at night or gets me up in the morning is civil rights and social justice. And, that's not going to be the thing for everyone. And that's great. We need people doing all different types of things to make this world work. And so finding what the thing is for you that makes you excited, that makes you passionate, that gets you up, that keeps you up. I think it's really important, and being open and flexible, and taking time to find that. I think sometimes I remember when I was in college, my parents were always like, you got to go to grad school, you got to go to law school, you got to get a job, and obviously that's all important, but you also want to make sure that you are making time to make sure you're doing stuff that you're gonna really feel is rewarding and fulfilling. If not, you're just going to be miserable, and no one wants that.
Yeah.
And then the second piece of advice is, make sure you take time for you, whether that's if you like to travel, if you like to, cook, if you like to watch sports or play sports or whatever the thing is, I think there's often this race to like be an adult and to have a job and to have kids and to do all these things that people may want to do or people tell you that you should do, and those are all good things, but I also think it's important to make sure that you are carving out time for yourself, for your mental health, for your physical health, and just for your well-being, right? Like, if you like to travel, it's a lot easier to do that. I remember when I was graduating college, I had no money and I was like, I can't travel because, I need to go and I need to get a job. But it only gets harder as you get older, right? And you only get more obligations and more commitments. And so really making time to do things that you think are important, even when it seems difficult, I think is important advice.
Yeah. These days, I think it's never been easier to travel. With Airbnb and budget airlines, there's almost nowhere in the world that you can't get to if you save and you're a little creative and you're willing to, not stay in 5-star hotels. But I think, yeah, definitely, I think travel is like the best education you can get, better than anything you'll ever get in a classroom. No offense
For
to
sure. And the world
professors,
is just, the
because you
world is a
experience the world.
beautiful, fascinating place, and you should check it out. Yeah.
Last question, because we're running out of time. If you could have a billboard that was overlooking the Cross Bronx Expressway and it could say anything, 10 words or less, what would it say?
That's a hard question. I think I would maybe go back to what I was saying before about hate and about the role that we each could play in helping other people be seen and not feel alone. I don't know what the 10 words would be. Something cheesy like be your brother and sister's keeper or something like that. But like I don't know, but they know those commercials on TV that are like, you should be nice to everyone. And I mean they're cheesy, but it's true. And it's like I think if we could just be a little, and I think the Cross Bronx is a place where people could like benefit from some like kindness and thinking about other people. And so if we could spend some time, just reminding ourselves about that and reminding ourselves that even in rush hour traffic of the Cross Bronx, that the people in those other cars,
They're
are
humans.
they are humans. They are our partners and our families and our community members, and we remember that. I think that would make our world just a little bit better of a place.
Wonderful. Johnathan, that's all the time we've got for today. Just want to say thank you so much for
So
coming on the podcast. It was great reconnecting with you after all these years, and continue the great work, and hope to have you on again as a guest in the future to just connect and see what you're up to.
that would be lovely. Thanks so much for having me. And again, congratulations to all those who are graduating.
Very much.
And
Thank you so much. All right. Have a good one, John.
take care. Take care.